I've really enjoyed following Joseph's life in Genesis at church over the last year or so, actually, and in our small groups. And his whole life seems to propel towards one verse where Joseph speaks to his brothers who have profoundly wronged him. In Genesis 50:20, it says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." So when we see Joseph's life laid out in Genesis, we might think, how can he forgive them for the way that they treated him? So I want to explore this briefly with you now. So this world is a broken world, and it's full of sinners who think the world revolves around themselves. And as long as there's conflict in the world, forgiveness will be paramount. But how will we deal with that pain that happens? Will we deal with it with resentment, revenge, resolution? And much of history hinges on whether conflicts will be resolved through forgiveness. So, what is forgiveness? In my view, I think forgiveness is forfeiting the right to retaliation or retribution. It's saying that the crime that I have against me is so big that I'm not in a position to administer justice wisely. So I'm going to hand that to someone else, which opens up the way to restoration. Now, all religions and ways of thinking seem to have a concept of forgiveness, but the Bible offers a unique experience of resolution, and here's how it works. So say, for example, I'm going to choose Carl. Carl decides to burn down your house with your family still inside it. And a natural good response to Carl would be anger and the desire for justice. However, the humble response is knowing that you're limited in your ability to judge the situation well. And so by forgiving him, you're requesting that God takes the role of judge. And that makes restoration possible. Now, if God is judged, God is a perfect judge, and he will judge in his perfect timing, and that judgment will fall on the offender. Unless the offender puts their trust in God, and then that judgment falls on Christ at the cross. Now we're going to focus on a few examples in Joseph's life where forgiveness happens. At the very beginning, Joseph's brothers attempt to kill him, but then driven by greed, they sell him as a slave to a foreign nation. And then they lie to his dad about that he's dead. Later, he's falsely imprisoned, and God brought him out of prison and into a position of power. So Joseph was just a teenager when his brothers sold him as a slave. And now he's in his late 40s, and his brothers are in front of him seeking food. And they're completely unaware of who he is. So Joseph shows them compassion. And he lets them live, and he feeds them, and he forgave them. And then following the death of his dad, Jacob, the brothers are worried that Joseph might now wreak revenge on them. So then they lie to him again, and they ask him, "Please, can you forgive us? Because that's what Dad said. Dad said to forgive us and don't show revenge." I mean, this whole thing is such a mess. Even though Joseph did forgive his brothers, they didn't feel forgiven, and they feared for their life. And there's lots of times where Joseph could have used his power for himself. Like when he became Prime Minister of Egypt, he could quite easily have wreaked revenge on Potiphar's wife, for example. Or when his brothers arrived pleading for food, he could have punished them for the trouble. But then he forgave them. So let's learn a little bit about the forgiveness that he brings. First of all, forgiveness is not quick and easy. Joseph forgave his brothers, but still they didn't accept his forgiveness. And we can really feel Joseph's pain as we reflect on how he sees his brothers. Each time his brothers come to him, he weeps. Forgiveness is rarely neat the first time. We are often confronted with the need to forgive and to forgive and to forgive. And then Jesus encourages us to forgive even when it hurts. In fact, Joseph's weeping, I think, is a sign that Joseph really is struggling with it too. And someone who struggles to forgive understands more the cost of forgiveness, much more than someone who just shrugs it off. And we also learn that forgiveness is not excusing. His response isn't, it's okay, don't worry about it. It's clear that they intended to harm him. which led to this spiraling effect of pain in his life. Because if you can excuse something, you don't need to forgive it. Joseph knows the promises of God, and in all things, God works for the good of those who love him. And God works in the midst of tragedy, and he can and does bring good out of evil. God's providence over our sinful action is one of the things that makes forgiveness possible and actually makes it a whole lot easier. And if we think about Joseph's life, even after all he's gone through, they're still trying to deceive him to save their own skin. But he forgives anyway. This tells us that forgiveness isn't dependent on someone else's confession. And actually the word forgiveness can mean like an act of grace. Forgiveness is always unmerited. Joseph didn't clarify the cruel details that when he was forgiving them. He didn't say, oh, you did this to me, you did this to me, you did this to me. No, he didn't want to bring up all the past pains to the surface. And I think also forgiveness teaches us that you don't have to have an agreed version of the past to forgive someone. And I think forgiveness and reconciliation is kind of drawing a curtain on the past and moving on. And it's letting go of your right to revenge. Joseph wouldn't exact revenge because he's not in the place of God. And this is a really crucial point. He recognizes that God is judge. It's also a humble recognition that we are also sinners in need of forgiveness, which means that when we forgive, we may not see compensation for the wrongs done here on earth. It's possible. Things may take a lot longer for us to see that. And I think we have little control over our memories, over what we forget. And we read in the Bible that God says that he remembers our sin no more when he forgives us. But I don't think we have that ability. Joseph remembered the pain that he experienced, and he even named his son Manasseh, which means God made me forget, which is, I think, a sign that he's actively not trying to allow the wrongs done to him in the past to define who he is. And I think forgiveness means not bringing up things again and again. It means not gossiping about it after you've forgiven the person. It means, I think, not even bringing it up to yourself. Forgiveness also means not retrusting. It's interesting that Joseph saw straight through their lie, but then he turned it into an opportunity to show God's perspective. Forgiveness definitely causes an attitude change to the one that hurts you, but retrusting is a judgment about the offender's trustworthiness. And therefore, retrusting depends partially on the other person. I don't think there's anything virtuous about trusting someone who's untrustworthy. And the Bible says that we're called to love our enemies, and we certainly see this with Joseph, that his anger drains out of him. But that doesn't happen immediately. And so forgiveness, I think, is incomplete until love replaces anger. But that will take some time. And then we think about a worldview without God. Forgiveness is merely just words and a hopeful attitude. I don't think the universe is empty. I think we can be confident there is a God who is just and who genuinely cares about our situation more than we could care about it. And I think being hurt in life is inevitable. And we never really think about forgiveness until we have to. And the natural reflex of being hurt is revenge. But Jesus takes forgiveness really seriously and leads by example. And so forgiveness is the reflex of redemption. Because the ultimate goal of forgiveness is reconciliation. You need two people to reconcile, but you only need one to forgive. I think C.S. Lewis sums it up in The Way to Glory really well when he says, real forgiveness means looking directly at sin, seeing it in all its horror, all its dirt, meanness, and malice, and nevertheless being wholly reconciled to the man who's done it. And that, and only that, is forgiveness. That we can, and that we can have that through God if we ask for it. So we have like loads of benefits of reading through Joseph's life and then Jesus' life as well, as we sit in our armchair doing that. But Joseph actually had to live it out. He had years of waiting, years of pain. He was stuck in a foreign land where they worshipped another god. Most of his life he spent not knowing what God was actually going to do with his life, how God was going to use him. Only with hindsight, he's able to see, and only with hindsight we're able to see as well. So maybe you're in a place of pain right now. Maybe you're trapped. Maybe this whole coronavirus is bringing out a whole lot of unhelpful things. But I think the Bible's clear that God has a plan for you. And maybe there are relationships that you need to restore through forgiveness. Maybe you need to think about that. And there will be some time to reflect on this. There's actually going to be some time at the end of church. Penny's going to open up a time of questions if that's helpful at all. For now, we're going to move on to a song. We're going to sing Man of Sorrows in response to this. Some of the struggles that Joseph went through point us to Jesus' life, who went through immense suffering to bring us forgiveness and reconciliation to God. So I'm going to hand over to Tom and Hannah now, who will lead us in that. And then after the song, there'll be a little bit of space to respond in prophetic prayer and comments, if that's helpful at all. I'll pass them to Tom and Hannah now.